So this is my last year, my last opportunity to partake in this outstanding event. And as I said yesterday night, I've been with the Chemed conference for many years, and it is always a privilege and an inspiration. And it's always hard to say goodbye to beautiful people and to very special events. But it is inevitable, and we all are headed home, and I have a flight today back to Eretz HaKodesh, to my kehillah, to my family, and I hope to see you all again. And I told Dr. Friedman, I hope the next conference will be free of charge in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. So the topic we will be discussing this morning is a question that I was actually asked some while ago, and that is, could a Kohen volunteer to donate a kidney? And I said many times in the past, for years, the film community was degraded and presented as lacking compassion. You don't donate organs. Why don't you donate organs? And the film community in America and in Israel leads the entire world, not by 5%, not by 10%, but by 100% in live kidney donors. And this is such an amazing chesed. I myself, I know about 150 live kidney donors, and I've been with them in this journey many times in the past, and it's the greatest chesed one could even imagine. And I say to all the others, it is far easier to donate your heart when you're dead than donate a kidney while you're alive. And this is really something we should be extremely proud of. Could a Kohen volunteer to donate a kidney? And the question is twofold. The smaller question is, would this disqualify him from doing avodas hamikdash? As a Kohen that is defined by Halachic criteria as a Baal Mum cannot do avodas hamikdash. And if he would be disqualified, would that be a transgression? Is a Kohen entitled to be a Baal Mum, even though he would be disqualified from avodas hamikdash? So there's a Gemara in Kedushin Chof Aleph Amud Beis, without going into problematic sugis, but there's a concept of Retzias Hu Eved, an Eved Ivri that does not want to leave his master's domain, his master's home after 6 years. And after 6 years, he's entitled to go home. And he says, Ahavti es Adoni, Ahavti es Beisoi. And he wants to continue being an Eved, a slave. Then we puncture his ear and the doorpost, and the Gemara says, Ein Eved Kohen Nirtza Mepnei Shenase Baal Mum. We do not perform Ritzia on an Eved if he's a Kohen, because that will disqualify him from Avodas HaMikdash. Is this halacha only in the days in which the Beis Mikdash is erect, B'yamei HaMikdash, or is it even in Golus? On one hand, we all hope and pray daily, but after all, the Beis Mikdash is not with us, and there is no avodah. Is it still an avodah to make yourself a Baal Mum and disqualified from avodas hamikdash? But this question is really irrelevant because it's mefurish in the Rambam, Perek Gimel, Perek Vav, Halacha Zayin from Hilchas Bias Mikdash, that only a Baal Mum in external organs is disqualified. That means if he's missing a limb, hand, foot, or another external organ. But if he's missing any internal organ, which is not nera mebachutz, he is still kosher avodas hamikdash. So this would not be the problem. The bigger problem would be exposing himself to tumas meis. Because as you all know, a Kohen can't go to a cemetery and he can't expose himself to tumas meis. And he will need to go into the hospital in order to donate an organ. What is more problematic, he wouldn't go into the hospital for preliminary examinations, and pikuach nefesh is not yet relevant. He will need to go through tests just to verify that he is a suitable donor, that he's fitting to donate a kidney. And at that stage, pikuach nefesh is still far off, and he is exposing himself to tumas ohel. So tumas ohel is more relevant in Eretz Yisrael than in America, but in a place like New York where so many Jews are in the hospital, we would assume that at every given moment there probably is a deceased Jew in the hospital, and Tumah expands and it goes from room to room wherever there's a Peseach Tefach. So our fundamental assumption is every hospital probably at any given moment there is Tumas oil. Many hospitals in Israel, like Shari Tzedek, to which we are more associated than other hospitals. I am the Poisek of Shari Tzedek, and we have with us Rabbi Sprung, who is the rabbi of Shari Tzedek. So in Shari Tzedek, there is a sign, an electronic sign, Azharat Kohanim. And when there is a deceased person in the hospital, there's a sign outside flashing so kohanim know that they cannot enter the hospital until that sign is shut off. But fundamentally, could a kohen expose himself to tumas meis in order at a later stage to donate a kidney? So there's a very famous shuva of the Noide B'Yehuda, Madura Tinyona. That means Chelik Beis Yoredei Simerei Shud, dealing with a person that passed away from stones in the gallbladder. Today, nobody passes away from stones in a gallbladder. Gallbladders could be removed, and it's minor surgery, and you could live 100 years without a gallbladder. But the story was going back more than 200 years. A person passed away, and the doctor said, we see this from time to time, and if we could perform an autopsy and examine the organ, maybe it would help us to treat patients in the future. And the Noide B'Yehuda paskins that there is an avera of nivul hameis, of desecrating the body of a person. We believe in the kedusha of life, and not only the kedusha of life, but even the body of a deceased person should be treated with dignity and with honor. And the Noide B'Yehuda says that pikuach nefesh is only defined as pikuach nefesh to override any other isur, only if it's chole befaneinu. If there's a person right here and now that we could save, but futuristic saving lives is not defined as pikuach nefesh, and it does not permit any transgression, any avera. So the concept of chole befaneinu we found one generation later in Shuvas Chasam Sofer, Shin Lamed Vov Yeredeya, and he deals with a very similar question. Doctors always want organs for research, and a person wanted to donate his body or sell his body for money for medical research. And the Chasam Sofer says the same, and he echoes the opinion of the Noide B'Yehuda. Saving lives in the future does not permit any avera in the present, and therefore, just to enhance and to progress medical research, that does not permit any avera, and they're not dealing with Chilul Shabbos, but a relatively mild avera, which is nivul hameis. So, according to the Noide B'Yehuda and the Chasam Sofer, l'cha'ira, the Kohen cannot expose himself to tumas kohanim because there is no chole befaneinu. Comes along the Chazon Ish in Simerei Ches Yeredeya, Ois Zayin, and the Chazon Ish says, why would it make a difference whether the sick, the ill man is here or there now, today, or tomorrow? Why would that make a difference? Pikuach nefesh overrides any avera. So the Chazon Ish explains, when the Noide B'Yehuda and the Chasam Sofer say, chole befaneinu, that should not be taken literally. And it all depends on reasonability. How reasonable is it to assume that the avera we commit today will indeed enable us to save lives in the future. So medical research, argues the Chazon Ish, and I think it's such a sensible argument. I think one of the shiurim I gave in the past few days, we talked about this. Medical research, no, that was a shiur I gave. I arrived less than a week ago to Detroit and then in Woodmere, and then I came to the Chemed conference. So sometimes it's confusing to me what I said where and when. So this is a shiur I actually gave in Woodmere a few days ago, not here. But I was asked, a person was a Holocaust survivor and decided to donate a big sum, a lot of money, to the cancer ward in a major hospital in America for cancer treatment. And the hospital said, we would very much prefer to use this money for cancer research. And he asked me, what is more important, expanding the ward and being able to treat more patients right here and now, or research that maybe in the future will help us to save many, many more lives? And my response was, there is no halachic decision on such a question. If the question would be phrased, we could save 5 people right now whose life is in jeopardy, or 20 people at maybe some future time, the psak definitely would be, save the 5 people now. This is a chiyuv pikuach nefesh, and you cannot neglect them in order to save more people in the future. But that is not the reality when we donate money to a hospital. So I don't know whether in California there really is a shortage of beds for cancer patients. And when you donate money to expand the ward, this itself will take time. And on the other hand, research is essential. It's fundamental. If not the research we've been doing for the past 2 or 3 decades, 20, 30, 40 years ago, thousands of people would not be living today. But on the other hand, research, we never know where it's going to take us. Billions of dollars are spent on research, and sometimes we hit a brick wall. So we cannot advance medicine without investing in research. But regarding pikuach nefesh, the Chazon Ish explains, saving future lives and being over on an avera now to advance research, that would not be considered pikuach nefesh. But if it is totally reasonable and we could fairly assume that we will be saving lives, it doesn't really matter whether the choile is befanenu or not. And therefore, the need for kidneys is vastly greater than the number of donors. In Israel, we are losing approximately 50 people every year waiting for transplants. The number in America probably is far, far, far greater. But 50 people that we're losing every year waiting for transplants is a big number, and each and every one of them is a life and a family. So I definitely think that being on the list to donate an organ is choile bifanenu. And chances are, if the person is young and healthy, that he's a fitting donor, and there's no reason to assume that he would be disqualified. If you're well, if you're healthy, and you're relatively young, and young regarding kidney donation doesn't mean you're 20 years old. You could be 30, 40, and 50, and you're still a perfect candidate to be a donor. And therefore, this would be considered choile bifanenu. One of the younger Talmidim of the Sam Sofer was Reb Chaim Sofer. He was the Av based in Munkach, and in his Sefer, Machne Chaim, Yoredei Chelik Beisim and Samach, he argues, and this is somewhat of a argument that for me is difficult to accept, but he argues that the Noide B'Yud and the Sam Sofer, this was not really a firm halachic ruling, but rather they were afraid of what we call in modern slang a slippery slope. And if we would permit nivul hameis for medical research, that probably will be abused, and who knows where they're going to take this. And therefore, they made a stand, and they said, you cannot expose the deceased person to nivel hameis in order to advance medicine. But in halachic criteria, if we wouldn't have the risk of medical establishment taking advantage of our heter, then even the Noidibud and the Chasam Sofer wouldn't insist there needs to be choyle b'fanenu. So this argument of the Machna Chaim is difficult to accept because the Noidibud and the Chasam Sofer both speak in very definitive halachic terms. So I would prefer the interpretation of the Chazon Ish, which means it doesn't really depend whether the choyle is here or there, today or tomorrow. It's all a question of reasonability. And in all likelihood, this person will be found a fitting donor, and when it becomes relevant, he will be saving a life. So many, many years ago, one of the greatest poskim of our time, that Tzitz Eliezer, wrote in his Tshuvis that donating a kidney is prohibited. Was he wrong? At the time, he was probably right. And that Tshuva was written 60 or 70 years ago. And in those days, the risk to the donor was substantially higher than it is today. And the benefit to the recipient was substantially lower than it is today. And putting your life in jeopardy, in substantial jeopardy, in order to maybe save the life of another, would be a prohibition. But today, when the risk on the donor is extremely low, in Israel, the organization Matnas Chaim recently celebrated the 2000th donation, and I spoke to a wonderful person here by the conference, and he is involved with a group in America that encourages kidney donation, and I was told by him that we passed the mark of 1,400 donors, and Baruch Hashem, to the best of my knowledge, they're all fine. Sometimes the recovery is more prolonged, but Baruch Hashem. So the risk to the donor is extremely low, and the benefit to the recipients are extremely high. And just to know that thousands of people are alive and functioning, and if not for the generosity and the Mesiras Nefesh of those donors, they would not be with us, is so uplifting. So therefore, my psak to this Kohen was, you could enroll and go into the hospital and test yourself in order to donate a kidney in the future. If there would not be a lack, I would say you cannot. Leave it to others. But because there is such a desperate lack of kidneys and people are dying on the waiting list, therefore I think it is permissible for a Kohen. My psak is a Kohen should not volunteer to be a member of Hatzalah unless he lives in a place in which there is a verified lack of volunteers. But if we have enough volunteers, a Kohen should not volunteer to this work because it is inevitable that he will need to expose himself to tumas oil. So fundamentally, is it permissible to be Machal Shabbos today in order to save lives tomorrow? When we're dealing with Tumas Kohanim, this is a relevant question, but is there a situation, a scenario in which you're Machal Shabbos today in order to save lives in the future? A few years ago, the Rabbonav of Johannesburg, South Africa, turned to me. The authorities decided that you cannot be a licensed paramedic unless you serve 1 month in a medical facility, not a private facility, but a government-run hospital. And this situation then was no Jew would ever go into a government-run hospital because they had the highest rate of AIDS in the entire world, and the medical services were not very great, and there's a local Hatzalah. But if we don't comply with their rules, volunteering an entire month, including Shabbos, in a facility in which no Jew would ever enter, you will need to be Mechala Shabbos in order to be licensed. And the Rabbonim told me, right now we have enough volunteers, but the burnout rate for Hatzolah volunteers is very high. And usually after a few years, people say, I have done my share, I have served enough, let others step in my place. So in 2 or 3 years, there will be no Hatzolah, because if you wouldn't have licensed paramedics, you cannot do this. It's against the law, and the only way to have licensed paramedics is if they volunteer right here and now to work on Shabbos in order to be licensed, and the Pikuach Nefesh will become obvious and relevant in 3 or 4 years. What would the halacha be? So could a person violate an Isser now in order to save lives in the future? So I quoted the Noide B'Yuda in the Chasam Sofer, and the argument of the Chazon Ish, their Isser doesn't apply if it's reasonable, but it's not enough to determine that their Isser doesn't apply. We need proof that it would be permissible to be over Aveda today in order to save lives in the future. And I brought 3 sources, relevant sources, to prove that it is mutar. One is the Gemara in Bava Kama Pei Gimel. We're not dealing with Chilul Shabbos, but Lebeis Rebbe, to the family of the Nasi, who were Mekurav Lemalchus. They had connections with the authorities, with the monarchy, with the family and the institutions of the ruling king. They had a special permit, Lesaper Kumi, and that was a certain hairstyle that was unique to clergy, to Catholic or Christian clergy. According to the Beis Yosef and Yoredei Kufayin Ches, that's the Issa Dioraisa of Bechukoseim Lo Teilechu. But they got a special permit because they need to be presentable, they need to mingle with the non-Jewish authorities, with the family of the ruler, and in order they should be socially presentable and they should be what we call today in, they got a special permit to get this hairstyle. According to the Beis Yosef, it's an Issa D'Oraisa. And the Beis Yosef asked, if it is an Issa D'Oraita, what would be the basis for leniency? What would be the basis of heter? And the Beis Yosef says, Pikuach Nefesh. Because sometimes the ruling party would issue a decree that will put Jewish lives in jeopardy. And we need the right people in the right places to negotiate with the authorities and see to it that that decree does not affect Jewish lives. We don't know how many they were. This family who were Mekurav Lemalchus. Were they dozens? Were they hundreds? Were they individuals? We have no way to know. But if you need to be presentable and respectable, probably they got a haircut not out of Pesach and out of Rosh Hashanah. Probably it was once a month or so. So many people were over on an Issa D'Oraisa on a steady basis because sometimes there might be a decree which would put Jewish lives in jeopardy, and we might be able to annul that decree, and that would be reason enough to permit an Aveda D'Oraisa. One source. The other is in Sanhedrin Daf Chavav. We're dealing with Shvius. Isur Avodas Adoma in the 7th year. Shnas Hasheva. This mitzvah is not relevant in America, but probably all of you know that once in 7 years, Jews in Eretz Yisrael need to abandon the land and not engage in any agricultural endeavor. And the Gemara says, Hetiru mishum aranona. The Chachamim permitted working on Shvius, agricultural work, because of taxes. And Tosfos explained, Chavav Amud Aleph Masechet Sanhedrin, Why would paying tax permit an issa d'oraisa? Two tirutzim in Tosfos. One is shvius b'zman hazeh d'Rabbanan, or maybe we're dealing with avodas hasurim mid'Rabbanan. The other teretz is pikuach nefesh. Why would that be pikuach nefesh? Because some people that might not be able to pay the taxes, and they will be tried and judged and put into jail. And sometimes when a Jew is in a non-Jewish jail, his life would be in danger. And that is why Chachamim were matir for the many, not the individuals, to work on shvius, because some people might not have enough money to pay their taxes. And some of the few of the few would find themselves in jail, and some of them, their life might be in danger, and Chachamim were matir. So these two cases, there is no pikuach nefesh right here and now, but we assume in the future, near or far, Jewish lives would be in jeopardy, and in both cases, we're dealing with the Isur Diorais. We are more familiar with the Halacha in Hilchos Shabbos. The source is Yom Pei Daled. If there is need to violate Shabbos to save a life, we don't look for a non-Jew or a minor, Gedolei Yisrael. The first to the scene is Mechalel Shabbos. And we don't even make an effort to do so using the services of a Shabbos Goy. And why is that? Two different interpretations by the great Rishonim, the Rosh and the Ran. Similar, but not the same. Similar, but not identical. The Rosh says, if we will use the services of a non-Jew, sometime in the future, a non-Jew will not be on the premises and will go looking for one until they will find a non-Jew to do what needs to be done to save a life. A person might lose his life and someone might die. To prevent this situation, Chachamim said, you never use the services of a non-Jew even though he is available. Right here and now, there's no need to be Mechalel Shabbos. We could do so asking a non-Jew to help us. But in the future, that might cause a situation in which a person would die. And therefore, Chazal said, do it right now and do it yourself. The Ran has a slightly different interpretation. People seeing that we ask a non-Jew to do what needs to be done to save a life might mistakenly think that if there is no non-Jew, you cannot be Mechalel Shabbos to save a life. And this mistake in the future would cause the loss of life. So according to both the Rosh and the Ran, right here and now, there's no need to be Mechalel Shabbos, but we are concerned that if we encourage this custom, asking a non-Jew to be Mechalel Shabbos, in the future, people will die. Source number 3 is not as relevant as 1 and 2, because in source number 3, after all, when the Jew is Mechalel Shabbos, he is Mechalel Shabbos directly to save a life. It could be avoided. We could have asked a non-Jew to do it, but based on our psak, the Jew will be Mechalel Shabbos in order to save a life right here and now. So his Chilul Shabbos would be directly Pikuach Nefesh, Masha Ein Kain in the first two sources, in which we're matter an Aveda Dioraisa to prevent Sakona in the future. So my psak to the Rabbanim in South Africa was, yes. However, I felt extremely uncomfortable having young Jewish boys be Mechalel Shabbos here and now. In order, we should have volunteers for Hatzalah in the future. And I think a posek also needs to use his intuition and his feeling and not only his mind and halachic ruling. And I told the Rabbanim, I don't think this is right. I don't think we could have people serving in a facility in which there never will be a Jew and be Mechala Shabbos on a steady basis in order that in the future we will have a Hatzalah. So the government in South Africa is extremely anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. This farce in The Hague against Israel was spearheaded by the government of South Africa. But it's a fascinating phenomenon. On the street, there is zero anti-Semitism. Zero. The black people in South Africa, like the Jews, they get along well with Jews. And when in all the campuses in the Western world there was chaos, no Jew was hurt or even shamed in the universities in South Africa. The street was calm, the campuses were calm, but the government is extremely anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic, and anti-Israel. So I told the Rabbanim, you need to turn to our friends in the Christian world, in the Muslim world, and let them speak on our behalf, on the behalf of religious people trying to live according to their beliefs. And that is what they did, and they were successful. And the government agreed to change the regulations and have an exemption for Jews not needing to be working on Shabbos. So even though by fundamental halachic criteria, my psak would be, you could be Mechala Shabbos in order to ensure that in the future, Jewish lives will not be in jeopardy. But my feeling was, this is just not the right thing. And Baruch Hashem, they were successful in the help of our friends and clergymen in other denominations, other religions that volunteered to help further the Jewish cause. And they bent the rules, and there was no longer a need to be Mechala Shabbos to save lives in the future. But this is a very important discussion, and it might come up in different scenarios. Pikuach nefesh, which is doicha, kol asurim shebetayr, is not always direct and right here and now. Sometimes it's the future, and sometimes it is indirect and not direct. And in many cases, it still would be within the boundaries of Pikuach Nefesh, that is Doicha Shabbos and all other Isurim. Fundamentally, this entire discussion is about the sanctity of life, Kedushas HaChayim. And to us, life is precious, and no one's life is his own possession. We live for a Kodesh Baruch Hu. Life is a gift, and life is a sacred trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu entrusted to each and every one of us to serve Hashem and then to live on in the world to come. So thank you for having me here, and it was a pleasure and a privilege, and I look forward to many opportunities in the future. You should all have a great day.